A man in his 40s, a husband and a father to 2 young children, was reunited with a teenage daughter that he gave up for adoption 17 years earlier. What should have just been a heartwarming reunion between a father and his long-lost daughter quickly spiraled into something unimaginable. Something so disturbing that it feels like a plot ripped from the darkest possible corners of fiction.
911, what's the location of your emergency?
Someone just went by and shot this guy in the truck.
Somebody just shot somebody in a truck on Route 55, sir?
I can't even believe this is happening.
Today I'm going to tell you about a case of a man in his 40s that was reunited with his 18-year-old biological daughter. He then married her. He got her pregnant. And by the end, 4 people were dead. How does something like this even happen? Is there a psychological explanation that can help us understand it? And how can we make sure that something like this never happens again? Thank you so much for joining me for this week's investigation. My name is Brianna, and I'm hot on the case. And just a quick word from this week's sponsor. The following is an ad by BetterHelp. Stress from the workplace is a huge issue nowadays, with 61% of the global workforce experiencing higher than normal levels of stress. So if you're feeling off, know that you're not alone, especially with summer and the nice weather. Being cooped up or feeling like you're stuck at work can be a huge struggle for a lot of people. Vacations are great. I just got back from one myself, but they're a short-term solution for a long-term stress issue. A common misconception is that therapy is just for those who've experienced some sort of trauma. But therapy can be a useful tool for everyone. It helps you learn positive coping skills and empowers you to be the best version of yourself. I have a super busy personal and professional life with research, meetings, events, and stuff like that. So if you're like me and it's hard to fit time for therapy into your schedule, I recommend BetterHelp. It's so convenient. You can join a session with your therapist at the click of a button, and you can switch therapists at any point. As the largest online therapy provider in the world, BetterHelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a diverse variety of expertise. So unwind from work with BetterHelp. My listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/HOTC. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/HOTC. In 1995, before TikTok and texting, there were online chat rooms, and this was a new frontier. For the very first time ever, people from all around the world could speak to each other and connect. But this also gave predators a brand new way to find and exploit young victims, hiding behind computer screens and anonymous usernames. One such case began with a 20-year-old man living in New York named Stephen Pladell. On one of these online chat rooms, he met a 15-year-old girl named Alyssa Garcia from San Antonio, Texas. And this alone already sounds terrifying, but it is only the beginning. The 20-year-old Stephen and 15-year-old Alyssa became friends in this internet chat room, and then they began messaging each other every single day. And then they began staying up all night, speaking to each other on the phone, and quickly the two had felt like they had fallen in love. Stephen eventually traveled across state lines to meet Alyssa in person. Although she was still a minor and he was a legal adult, the two began a relationship, one that Alyssa's parents strongly opposed. And at just 15 years old, because her parents wouldn't allow her to be in this relationship with a 20-year-old man, Alyssa ran away from home, and she ran away to New York so she could be with Stephen. This was a textbook case of grooming. An adult built trust with a vulnerable minor, isolated her from her family, and exploited her emotional immaturity to create a relationship that, under the law, was entirely non-consensual and illegal. And at this point, Steven knew what he was doing was wrong because he kept his new underage girlfriend a secret from his friends and family. And then 2 years into this relationship, when Alyssa was 17 years old, only 17, she fell pregnant for the first time with Steven's child. And on January 29th, 1998, they brought their daughter, Denise Pladell, into the world. And according to Alyssa, after the arrival of their little baby girl, Denise, Steven completely changed. The once loving and affectionate man became abusive and violent and angry with a short, explosive temper. And Steven just could not bond with their little daughter, Denise. He got very triggered and angry every single time she would cry and scream, which is, just so you know, something that babies do. Babies cry, but he just couldn't handle it. He would just scream in her little face. The abuse became physical as well. Steven would pinch their newborn daughter until she was black and blue. Not only this, he was very neglectful, and he would just lock her away every single time she cried. Alyssa said, and I quote, "He would do things like cover her mouth when she would cry. He pinched her all over her body and turned her black and blue a couple times. Eventually, he said that he just couldn't stand the screaming and crying anymore. So he started placing her into a cooler or in an ice chest. Sometimes he would put a blanket in there to keep a crack open. Sometimes he would shut it and he wouldn't let me go back to open it. He would make me wait a few minutes until I could go back, and I'd open the cooler and she would just be gasping for air, drenched in sweat, bruises on her. I would just scoop her up and I would shut the bedroom door so he couldn't bother me. And I would rock her back and forth and tell her how sorry I was for the life that she was living." Alyssa Garcia said that by the time her daughter Denise was just 8 months old, she knew that her baby daughter would never be safe with Steven. And despite the tremendous heartbreak, Alyssa made what she believed was the only choice to keep her daughter safe and to protect her child. She put her baby up for adoption. Denise was adopted by Anthony and Kelly Fusco, a loving family from Dover, New York. They renamed her Katie Rose Fusco, and by all accounts, her childhood from then on was a happy and normal one. Katie grew up surrounded by love and support from her adoptive parents and from her siblings. Katie was said to be a very kind and creative, smart girl full of passion. She was particularly known for her compassion towards animals. That's actually why she chose to become a vegetarian. And she would often bring home stray cats and nurse them back to health. She was also socially and politically active. She had lots of friends, and she identified proudly as a feminist and frequently attended protests for causes that she believed in. Art was Katie's deepest passion, and she dreamed of one day making a living off of art. As Katie got older, I'm talking her older teen years, she wanted to find and meet her birth parents, which is something that is very common for people that are put up for adoption at some point in their lives wanting to do. It's very normal to want to know where you came from. And according to multiple sources, Katie first made contact with her birth mother, Alyssa, via Facebook Messenger. Katie and Alyssa messaged back and forth. They caught up on the last 18, 17 years that they had missed, and eventually they began speaking every single day for almost a year. This part of today's case will be extremely difficult to understand and process for many of you, especially for those that are unfamiliar with the complexities of long-term trauma and abuse. So after Alyssa had given Katie up for adoption because she was afraid of Katie being near Steven because of Steven's extreme abuse and neglect, Alyssa remained in a relationship with Steven. They actually got married and over the years had 2 more daughters together. Now, following the events of today's tragedy, this decision was heavily criticized, but it is important to understand the psychological depth of grooming and control. At this point, Alyssa is an adult, but she has been manipulated and isolated by Steven since she was only 15 years old. Survivors of long-term control often struggle to leave their abusers even after recognizing the harm that they are experiencing at the hands of their abuser. Following today's tragedy, Alyssa has said that after putting Katie up for adoption, Stephen seemed to change, and she really did want to believe that he had changed for the better. That's why they married. That's why they had 2 more daughters together. But Stephen's behavior would just get worse and worse. He not only developed a very intense obsession of firearms, which is very scary considering his short temper, but Alyssa and her 2 young daughters over the years were living in constant fear and were just walking on eggshells around Stephen, trying to avoid triggering his rage. Stephen was unable or unwilling to hold down a job, and while he was unemployed and remained at home with the children, Alyssa worked long hours as the sole provider for the family. And while being the only parent at home with the 2 young daughters, Stephen was abusive and neglectful. Alyssa later recounted one disturbing incident where one day, while Stephen was home with their one really young daughter, the young girl had wet herself. And Alyssa came home after a long day of work and found that Stephen had forced their daughter to just stand in the shower, covered in her own urine, for hours until her mom came home and would clean her. In another very unsettling episode, quick trigger warning, I'm about to talk about things with animals, which I know is really hard for a lot of people to hear, even people that watch and listen to true crime content. One day, a neighbor's cat accidentally wandered onto their property, and Stephen reportedly killed this neighbor's cat by beating it to death with his bare hands. And Alyssa would say that the only reason that Stephen killed this cat with his bare hands was because he hated cats. Literally, while researching this case, every single piece of information I learned about this man just shows what a seriously sick individual he was. I did not find, and I read almost like every piece of information on this case, and I could not find one even slightly redeemable quality about Stephen Pladell. So by the time that Katie reconnected with her biological parents, Alyssa's and Stephen's marriage had completely broken down. They were no longer sharing a bed together, and Stephen was sleeping on the couch in the living room. In June of 2016, Katie Rose Fusco had graduated from high school. She had made plans to attend college in the fall, but before continuing her education, she decided that she wanted to take a step that would forever alter her life. She wanted to meet her biological parents in person for the very first time. She flew to meet Alyssa and Stephen at their home, along with her 2 fully biological sisters, who were at this point around the ages of 11 and 7 years old. And what began as a joyful and emotional reunion soon led to a major life decision. Katie told her adoptive parents that she wanted to take a gap year. She was not going to be attending college this upcoming fall, and instead, she was going to be moving in with her biological parents. She wanted to get to know her biological parents a little bit more, and then, after a year or so, she would go to college. At this point, the Fuscos reportedly were not aware of the full history of Katie and her biological parents, specifically that Stephen had abused Katie as a baby, which was the reason that Katie was even put up for adoption in the first place. But even without knowing that, I'm sure as adoptive parents that have raised this baby since she was less than 1 year old, their daughter wanting to live with her biological parents and take a year off school and put off college was a very hard pill for them to swallow. But still, at this point, Katie was 18 years old. She was legally an adult, and they supported her decision to spend 1 year living with her birth mother, her birth father, and her 2 little sisters that she had just learned that she had. And for Alyssa, Katie moving into their home was a dream come true. I'm sure after years of trauma and heartbreak, she finally felt like her family was whole again. And the three sisters, Katie and the 11 and 7-year-old, quickly bonded and they got really, really close. And Alyssa and Katie became very close as well, birth mother and daughter. But beneath the surface, warning signs were already forming. Stephen stayed unemployed. He did not get a job, and Alyssa continued to work long hours to support her family, especially since now another mouth was in the house to feed. So Katie was left most days just with Stephen and the two younger children. And at first, Alyssa was grateful that Katie had this opportunity to spend time with her siblings and to build a relationship with her biological father. There were no red flags. This was sweet. This was wholesome. But then Stephen's behavior started to change. Shortly after Katie moved in, Alyssa noticed that her husband Stephen began to drastically change his appearance. And I'll put pictures on the screen if you're watching the video version, but Stephen, when Katie first met him, was, dressing like your stereotypical dad clothes. He had short hair, he had a beard. And then shortly after meeting his 18-year-old biological daughter, Stephen began dressing in trendier clothes, like tight shirts and tight jeans. He shaved his face and grew out his hair, and it definitely looked like he was trying to look younger, which was definitely strange. But the true red flag came just 6 weeks after Katie moved into their home, when Alyssa learned that Stephen was no longer sleeping on the couch where he had been staying for the past handful of months due to their deteriorating marriage. And instead, Stephen, Alyssa's husband, was now sleeping in Katie's bedroom, their daughter. Now, he claimed that he was just sleeping on the floor, but can we believe him? And does that even make a difference? Does it even make it any better? This gave Alyssa serious, icky feelings. She knew something was wrong. So she confronted her husband, Stephen, about this, and this sparked a major argument between Alyssa and Stephen, but also Katie. Katie defended her father, Stephen, insisting that nothing inappropriate was happening. And Alyssa, her birth mother, even tried to warn Katie about Stephen, Alyssa's husband, and Katie's biological father. She even went as far as to tell her that the reason that they even put her up for adoption was because Stephen was abusing her so badly as a baby that she had practically almost was killed by Stephen. But the information that Stephen had nearly killed her as a baby really didn't seem to faze Katie, according to Alyssa. Katie did not seem to believe Alyssa, or perhaps she did not want to. Katie, at this point, has now been manipulated and groomed by Stephen, just like Alyssa had been when she was a teenager herself. And by November 2016, only a few months after Katie had moved in, Alyssa could no longer ignore her growing fears. The environment in her home had become increasingly unstable, and she no longer felt like it was safe for her and her daughters. And she made the painful but necessary decision to separate from Stephen, file for divorce, and move out of their home with their two younger daughters. During the divorce proceedings, Katie was still living with Stephen, and Stephen still had visitation with the two younger daughters that he had with Alyssa, which, let me remind you at this point, these two younger daughters are only about 11 and 7 years old. One day, while cleaning her 11-year-old daughter's room, Alyssa stumbled upon her daughter's diary. Alyssa said that there was something in her, call it mother's intuition, that told her to read her 11-year-old daughter's journal, which is a major invasion of privacy, and I would normally not, support this behavior at all, but considering the circumstances, I'll give Alyssa a pass. And in her 11-year-old daughter's diary, her child wrote that her older sister Katie was pregnant, and that her father, who was also Katie's biological father, was the one that got Katie pregnant. And I'm sure reading this made Alyssa's stomach drop. I can only imagine that she felt sick or dizzy. Who knows? And in her daughter's journal, she wrote that her father told her and her 7-year-old sister that they were no longer allowed to call Katie their big sister and instead should refer to her as their stepmother. And I'm going to put photos of the diary entry on the screen for those of you that are watching the video version, but please keep in mind that this is the handwriting of a child, but I will read you the part about Katie's pregnancy. The 11-year-old girl wrote in her journal, quote, "She is pregnant and gained weight, and my dad calls her baby also his baby. Did he make her pregnant? My dad even says that she's my stepmom. WTF? He doesn't even want me to call her sister anymore. Katie is my sister. She's probably his wife now, but in nature, she's only my sister. Does she see me as a daughter or a sister?" Unquote. And God, I can only imagine for these two young girls, 11 and 7, one finding out that they have a older sister. I mean, at this point, it's possible that they did not even know of Katie's existence before Katie came into their lives, moved into their home, and then their parents split up. They're not even living in the same house anymore. And then out of nowhere, their father tells them that this new older sister that they've just met is now their stepmom and that she's pregnant with her baby. I'm sure that this was incredibly confusing for these two young girls. And remember, this is all happening less than 1 year since Katie has come into their lives. At this point, Katie is freshly 19 years old, and her biological father, Stephen, is 42 years old, and he has gotten her pregnant less than 1 year after reuniting with the baby that he put up for adoption. It literally cannot get more sick and twisted if you tried. Stephen is seriously a messed up individual. I'll probably say it 100 times in this podcast episode. Something is seriously wrong in his head. As an adult, he preyed on and got a 15-year-old girl pregnant. She was 17 at the time. He abuses that baby to the point of nearly ending that baby's life, his daughter's life. And then that baby, when she's 18, 19 years old, he preys on her, he manipulates her, he grooms her, and then he gets her pregnant. And after reading this journal entry, I'm sure Alyssa was just feeling sick to her stomach. She actually calls up Stephen on the phone to confront him. And she asks if this is true. Did what I just read in our daughter's journal, is this true? Did you get our daughter pregnant? She even asks her, is this the reason that you were rushing our divorce because you want to marry our daughter? And Stephen just replies, I thought you already knew. Stephen tells Alyssa on the phone that his mother, Katie's biological grandmother, knows that they're together and that he got his daughter pregnant, and she supports it. Stephen tells Alyssa on the phone that Katie's adoptive parents, the Fuscos, know about their relationship and they support it. After getting off that call with Stephen, Alyssa called the police and an investigation began in May of 2017. And when they began investigating, of course, the first thing that they start doing is speaking with Alyssa and Stephen's two younger daughters, the 11 and the 7-year-old, because they're the only witness to this crime. And they both say that their dad and big sister were sleeping in the same bed, living as a couple, that they were told to not call Katie their sister, to call Katie their stepmom, and that Katie was pregnant with her father's baby. But that this was a secret, that the girls shouldn't tell anyone, especially not anyone at school, because they would be made fun of. And this just shows you that Stephen and Katie know that this is wrong. If they're telling these children, don't tell anyone because people will make fun of you if your dad and your sister are gonna have a baby together. Stephen and Katie then ended up moving into their own home together, where they were living openly as a couple. They would walk down the street hand in hand and kiss in public. And then on July 20th, 2017, Katie and Stephen were married in a small ceremony. Katie would share wedding photos on social media where you can see she is clearly very, very pregnant. And shockingly, this wedding was attended by Stephen's mother, Katie's grandmother, Grace Pladell, as well as Katie's adoptive parents. Everyone involved in this wedding knew that Katie and Stephen were blood related, that they were biologically father and daughter. A member of the Fusco family later said that her adoptive parents knew that this was wrong, but they were scared of intervening because they were scared that they would lose Katie if they intervened, that they would just lose her completely. So they were pretending to be supportive. Marrying a blood relative, like in this case, is illegal in every single state in America. There's literally a question when applying for a marriage license that asks if you and the person you're trying to marry are knowingly related. And when filing for their marriage license, Katie and Stephen lied and they checked no, that they were not related. And then on September 1st, 2017, when Katie was 19 years old and her father, Stephen, was 42 years old, Katie gave birth to a little boy they named Bennett. And this was technically Stephen's grandson and son, and this would be Katie's son, but also her half-brother. Katie gave birth to her brother. This child being born was evidence that a crime had been committed, and on January 27th, 2018, 2 days before Katie turned 20 years old, her and Stephen were both arrested on charges of incest as well as other charges. And their baby Bennett was put into the custody of Stephen's 72-year-old mother, Grace. And because of the scandal of all of this, if that is even the right word to describe this horror, this story quickly made headlines across the country to the disgust and shock of many. And surprisingly, Katie and Stephen had a lot of supporters. I know, right? So apparently a lot of their supporters saw them as two consenting adults, and they did not think it was weird that they were in a relationship because they did not meet until Katie was 18 years old. It's not like Stephen had raised her entire life, whatever. These supporters of Katie and Stephen also allegedly created a GoFundMe to raise money for their bail. And eventually, they were both released on bail pending their trials. And after their release on bail, a court order prohibited Katie and Stephen from seeing each other. Katie returned to New York, moved back in with her adoptive parents, and Stephen remained in their home in North Carolina. However, the court order did not restrict Stephen from visiting his mother's house or seeing his infant son, Bennett. On April 11th, 2018, Stephen visited his mother and he told her that he was going to be taking their son Bennett to New York to visit Katie. But tragically, this was not Stephen's true intention. It seemed like after being distanced from Stephen, the brainwash that Katie was under began to wear off. Because earlier that exact same day, Katie called her father Stephen and said that she wanted to break up. She wanted a divorce. She realized what had happened was wrong and it was never going to work out. At just 20 years old, Katie still had hopes of attending college and pursuing a career as an artist. She still wanted all of those things. And at this point, she had realized that this man had abused her situation. He had uprooted her entire life when all she wanted was to meet her biological father. He ruined all of her plans. And at this point, she was about to go to trial, face jail time, face, insane fines at the very least. And that it was all because of him and his manipulation and his abuse. And she just wanted her life back. But Stephen, sick, twisted, evil Stephen, wasn't going to let his daughter or his son have a happy ending. After collecting Bennett from his mother's home, Stephen returned to his North Carolina residence where he took the life of 7-month-old Bennett. Following this horrifying act, Stephen drove throughout the entire night over 600 miles to New York, where Katie lived with her adoptive parents. At this point, it was the early morning hours of April 12, 2018. Stephen was parked across the street from the Fusco family home. Katie and her adoptive father, Anthony Fusco, they left their home, they got in their car, they were actually going to drive to Katie's adoptive grandmother's house. I guess they did not see that Stephen was there. I bet they weren't expecting Stephen to be in New York. He was following them, and then at a red light, Stephen pulled up next to their car and he opened fire on them, fatally shooting 20-year-old Katie Fusco, his biological daughter, and her adoptive father, 56-year-old Anthony Fusco.
911, what's the location of your emergency?
Hello, this is Connecticut. It's on Route 7 and Route 55. Someone just went by and shot this guy in the truck.
Somebody just shot somebody in a truck on Route 55, sir?
Yes, right at the beginning of Route 55 and Route 7. It just happened. I'm a fireman out of New York. The car pulled up, went around him, shot him. Whole clip pulled into his head.
Okay, sorry. Is you still with him?
We're here at the road.
Where? Right at the intersection?
Yes, sir, right at the intersection.
Okay, sir.
He's deceased, boss. The truck's in the middle of the road.
He's dead?
Yes, sir. Brains are on the road.
And he was shot. Did you see the person who shot him?
Yeah, we pulled up. There's a whole, yes.
Who? Okay, which way did the vehicle go?
Headed toward New Milford, down Route 7.
Down Route
south.
7? What, can you describe the vehicle to me?
It's a blue minivan with, I believe, a South Carolina plate.
Blue minivan, South Carolina plate?
Yes, sir. A light blue minivan.
Okay, sir, just stay on the line with me.
Stephen would call his mother to confess that he had killed Bennett, Katie, and Anthony. He also told her his intention to take his own life. His mother called 911 hoping that they would be able to find Stephen in time, and very quickly after that 911 call, police found Stephen's vehicle approximately 25 minutes away from where he had killed Anthony and Katie.
He killed his wife. He killed her father. And I can't even believe this is happening. He left the baby dead when he left.
And inside the vehicle, they discovered that Stephen Pladell was dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Stephen Pladell will forever be remembered as a predator, an abuser, a manipulator, and a coward who committed some of the most horrific, disgusting crimes I've ever read about and was too afraid, too much of a coward to even face them in the court of law. This is a case that is so unbelievable. It seems like a work of fiction, but you know what they say, life truly is stranger than fiction. This is also not the only time I've ever heard of something like this. I remember at least 2 Steve Wilkos episodes about really, really young women who met their biological fathers as adults. These biological fathers were not in their childhoods, and they meet these men, their fathers, hoping to reconnect, have a father-daughter relationship with them, and that they were manipulated into starting these twisted, dark relationships with their fathers. For young girls like Katie Fusco, meeting your biological parents can be very stressful. There's already a feeling of abandonment going into this meeting because you're meeting people that gave you up for adoption. There's insecurity. Why didn't these people want me? So going into that first meeting, you really want to impress these people that you're meeting. For these children meeting their birth parents for the first time, they really want their birth parents to like them, accept them. Usually they will even excuse behavior that they normally wouldn't excuse if it was anyone else other than their birth parents. And it's absolutely sick. Katie was a teenager fresh out of high school. She wanted to meet her biological parents, fill a hole that she had in her life. She wanted to know where she came from. And this sick individual used all of that to get something that he wanted. During my research on this case, I actually stumbled upon a hypothesis that's been floating around since the 1980s, which was coined genetic sexual attraction. Apparently, there is a lot of cases where relatives that didn't grow up together, when they meet for the first time as adults, they can be attracted to each other in this way. And this can be mothers and their daughters, mothers and their sons, fathers and their daughters, or even siblings that did not grow up together and meet for the first time as adults. But this is not science, at least not proven science. This is just a theory and one that is heavily criticized. I actually read one journalist's opinion on this, which I thought I would share with you. Her name is Amanda Mercate, and she says that this is a half-baked pseudoscience nonsense that people dreamed up just to justify continuing unhealthy, abusive relationships. This case is heartbreaking on every single level. It's a case of grooming, abuse, manipulation, and the ultimate betrayal of trust. Katie Fusco did not grow up with her biological father. She wasn't raised by him, but when they reconnected, she fell into the exact same trap that her mother had nearly 20 years earlier. What happened wasn't love. It was abuse. And by the time her father's manipulation became clear to her, it was already too late, and her father took her life, her real father's life, and her son's life. This case forces us to ask really hard questions. How do we protect vulnerable people from predators, even if those predators are their own family? How do we educate ourselves and others about grooming, control, and the cycle of abuse? And most of all, how do we make sure that something like this never happens again? So with that being said, if you or someone you know is in a situation where something feels wrong, even if you can't fully explain it, there is help and you are not alone. So here are some trusted resources, and all of these will also be in the description and on the screen for video watchers of Hot on the Case. First, I have RAINN, which is RAINN, and you can contact RAINN by calling 800-656-HOPE or visit rainn.org. That is again RAINN.org for confidential support 24/7. I also have Love is Respect. You can text Love is LOVEIS, no spaces, to 22522 or visit loveisrespect.org for help with unhealthy or abusive relationships, and this does include emotional manipulation and grooming. Katie's story cannot be undone, but by telling it, by facing the uncomfortable truth of it, and by giving survivors the tools to speak up, we can honor her memory in the most important way, by preventing another tragedy like hers. Please, at the end of this case, please be respectful. Katie did not deserve what happened to her. Her father, Anthony, did not deserve what happened to her. But please remember little baby Bennett, who was absolutely innocent in all of this. He was only 7 months old and he never even had a chance. Thank you so much for being here this episode of Hot on the Case, listening to these people's stories. It really does mean the world to me. And I will see you guys all next week when we are hot on the case once again.